The Media Institute, the foremost independent advocate for the First Amendment for over 4 decades, is one of the nation's leading nonpartisan organizations focused on media and communications policy. The Media Institute promotes freedom of speech, recognizes excellence in journalism, and encourages a competitive media environment and communications industry. Considering the current state of affairs in the nation's capital and across the country, our mission is more relevant than ever. Thanks to our sponsors and supporters. At the platinum level, AT&T, Charter Communications, Consumer Technology Association, iHeartMedia, LG Electronics USA, Tegna, Verizon Communications, and Viacom CBS. Our gold sponsors include America's public television stations, CTIA, Everything Wireless, Education Networks of America, Interactive Advertising Bureau, National Association of Broadcasters, Comcast NBC Universal, and NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. Silver sponsors include ACA Connects, America's Communications Association, the Advanced Television Systems Committee, ATSC, Cooley LLP, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Covington and Burling LLP, Cox Enterprises Inc., Davis Wright Tremaine LLP, DLA Piper, Fox Corporation, Lorman Center PLLC, News Media Alliance, T-Mobile, U.S. Telecom, Wiley, and Wilkinson Barker Nauer LLP. Thanks to all for making today's event possible. And now the President and CEO of the Media Institute, Rick Kapler.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome to our Communications Forum Virtual Luncheon for July. It's good to have you with us. And a special thanks, as always, to our luncheon sponsors for making these events possible. Let me tell you about a couple of things here at the Institute before I introduce today's speaker. On June 29th, our Digital Media Center released its first white paper. It's titled Calibrating Digital Media Trends for the Post-Pandemic New Normal. And it was written by our TMI Distinguished Fellow, Stuart Brotman. It's a very insightful look at how the pandemic has affected digital media usage and how the trends we've seen are likely to evolve in the future. If you'd like a copy of this white paper, please contact me directly. Next month in August, our luncheon series will take a summer break and then resume in September with Kathleen Ham, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for T-Mobile. There's been a lot going on at T-Mobile, of course, plus we'll get Kathleen's telecom perspective on developments at the FCC and Capitol Hill. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, someone who I think is well known to most of our audience. Jonathan Adelstein is the President and CEO of the Wireless Infrastructure Association, or WIA, which represents nearly 200 companies devoted to building wireless broadband facilities that connect every corner of America. In fact, WIA is the principal organization representing the companies that build, design, own, and manage telecommunications facilities throughout the world. Its members include carriers, infrastructure providers, and professional service firms with a combined market cap of over $400 billion. Our speaker has headed that organization since 2012. Mr. Adelstein served as a commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission from 2002 to 2009 under President George W. Bush. At the FCC, he achieved bipartisan progress on issues including broadband expansion, widening access to the internet, and media diversity. In 2009, following the FCC, Commissioner Adelstein was nominated by President Barack Obama and confirmed by the Senate to serve as the administrator of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Utilities Service. There, he oversaw a $60 billion portfolio of rural electric, water, and telecommunications infrastructure loans. He spearheaded the strategic investment of nearly $7 billion under the Recovery Act into rural broadband and water infrastructure as part of an annual budget of up to $15 billion. As a member of the Obama administration, Mr. Adelstein was also a member of the White House National Science and Technology Council and the White House Business Council, meeting with business leaders across America. Previously, Mr. Adelstein held a number of legislative staff positions over 15 years in the U.S. Senate, culminating as a senior policy advisor to the Senate Majority Leader. Jonathan holds a master's degree in history and a bachelor's degree with distinction in political science from Stanford University. He's a graduate of Phillips Academy in Andover. He was born and raised in Rapid City, South Dakota, and we understand he's also an avid musician. But with headlines about infrastructure all over the news lately, we're looking forward to Commissioner Adelstein's insights on how broadband infrastructure should best be expanded. And let me remind you that during Jonathan's presentation, you'll have a chance to ask questions using the Ask a Question feature on your screen. Just type your questions and send them in, and we'll have a good Q&A session after his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to welcome our very distinguished guest, Commissioner Jonathan Adelstein.
Well, thank you, Rick, and thanks to the Media Institute for inviting me. I remember being with you back when I spoke as an FCC commissioner. Back then, you fed us lunch at the Four Seasons, but now, as a has-been, I'm just glad you brought me back at all, even if there's no food involved. And I'm sorry I can't provide steak to all of you out there, but this is a very timely opportunity to be before you, because the WIA infrastructure is literally our middle name. Now, our name's been used a lot lately, not in vain. Clearly, I have some thoughts about how the infrastructure bill takes shape. What we saw in the pandemic was how important connectivity is. All of us in the telecommunications industry take very seriously our special responsibility. We saw it like we'd never seen before. Our networks sustained the entire economy during the pandemic. We helped businesses to stay afloat. We helped children to continue learning. We helped healthcare providers reach people that needed their service. And that's what is at stake as we're crafting a funding plan. And I think it deserves really careful planning, not just easy answers. So today I'm going to talk about how wireless will play a key role in expanding broadband to rural America. And this really is personal for me because I'm, as Rick mentioned, from South Dakota, and I grew up there, and it's long been my personal goal at the FCC and later RUS and on the Hill before then, and now, of course, in the private sector, to pursue the goal that is, for a reason, the very first sentence of the Communications Act, to make communications available to all people of the United States. That's the very first sentence. And I need to explain, I think, a little bit how the fiber-only approach that some have advocated, though I think very well-intentioned, would crash on the messy rocks of reality in rural America, where I grew up. The bipartisan agreement that we've seen, that they're putting the finishing touches on now, hopefully, I think is going to really deserve our support, because it's moving toward a flexible standard that allows wireless to compete for funding. We're finding ourselves today in a surprising battle on Capitol Hill to get wireless even included in the biggest infrastructure investment ever considered. It's surprising that we have to fight for such a basic thing, because we've grown accustomed in many ways, I think, to policymakers recognizing that 5G is the next generation technology for the future. We're used to being sort of the golden child. It's predicted to create 4.5 million jobs and 1.5 trillion in economic growth. So it seemed obvious to us at the outset that an undertaking of this magnitude needed to harness every available technology, including wireless and fixed wireless, as well as fiber, to achieve the really essential goal of providing broadband to all Americans. So I've got to admit, our industry was taken a bit by surprise when so many policymakers aimed for what they called a future-proof strategy, mandating 100 megabit speed up and down, which was really code for fiber only. But this idea hadn't been properly vetted, considering the complexities of telecom networks, which I'm going to talk about today. And we know a little something about it because WI members own much of the fiber in the United States. We understand that each technology comes with trade-offs. Fiber provides outstanding bandwidth. It's essential to any national broadband build-out effort. There's no debate about the need to drive fiber deeper into the network. Fiber is an integral part of 5G networks. Some have argued that since expanding fiber would provide the ancillary benefits to wireless of having fiber deeper and closer to wireless towers, there's really no need to make wireless part of the plan. But this argument obscures the real question, whether fiber needs to reach directly into every remote home, or if fiber should sometimes terminate at a wireless antenna to serve many homes and businesses more effectively. I think both are part of the solution. Now, Congress and the White House are poised to make the greatest federal investments yet, $65 billion. An investment of this magnitude is a dangerous time to experiment with putting all our eggs in a single fiber basket. The plan, I think, should focus on how people actually use broadband. Most broadband networks are designed to provide more bandwidth for download traffic because that's what people need. People tend to download and use others more than they upload. The gap between downstream and upstream traffic has consistently grown over the last 10 years. This is uncontrovertible data. The ratio now is 14-1. Even if it shrunk, it would still be dramatically different. I think the current trends, though, are the other way. The current trends show download demand will continue to outpace upload. All these popular applications we're using in the pandemic and we were using before that use high upload bandwidth, such as video conferencing, like what you're watching today, don't require anything near symmetrical speeds. And it's certainly true, though, that consumers do value upload speeds. The problem is, when you're looking at this legislation, the fiber-only advocates propose making symmetrical upload the single primary gating criterion for funding. A provider like a wireless provider wouldn't even be eligible for funding unless it could provide service that really most people find of very little utility. That became the be-all and end-all. And by cementing in law a technologically discriminatory standard, such as a gating eligibility factor, Congress could hamstring its ability to address other priorities that it really cares about. Now, going back and looking at it, there was an article in Politico that showed the impetus of the fiber-only strategy was really apparently based in a 2017 FCC paper. It was little noticed at the end of the Obama administration, and looking back at it, it only envisioned fiber, but ironically, the major benefits it cited to justify federal investment all relied on wireless. These were transportation, like autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles don't have fiber trailing along behind them. Energy, which is dramatically reduced potentially with 5G. Healthcare, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing relies on IoT and wireless networks, as well as public safety and smart cities, which will benefit enormously from 5G. Now, those advocating a fiber-only strategy disregarded the longstanding consensus in U.S. telecommunications policy that Washington should pick a specific technology and law. It hadn't been done. We'd always held that given rapid American innovation, given our rapid development of technology, the government shouldn't pick winners and losers. We should let consumers decide in the marketplace what works after letting all technologies compete. So maybe too many of us took technological neutrality for granted because it's been so successful. Most recently, the wireless networks in the US rose to the challenge of the pandemic and they performed magnificently. US networks were the envy of the world. Traffic dramatically increased overnight, but mobile data speeds kept up, and that was not true in other countries. And what really hasn't been discussed enough are the overwhelming benefits of wireless that reliance on a single technology would shortchange. I was finally able to make that case before the US Senate Commerce Committee at a hearing late last month. I highlighted the need for an all of the above strategy that harnessed fixed and mobile wireless along with fiber. I think it really resonated with senators that wireless networks address many Biden administration and congressional priorities. Among my main points, I said that wireless can get service up more quickly to your constituents. Rural Americans need mobility. Public safety relies on wireless. 5G is a fundamental technology to address climate change, and wireless is often more resilient and gets restored faster when there's a disaster. These are all urgent needs that wireless can help Congress address. At the hearing, I discussed my experience overseeing RUS for the Obama-Biden administration. And what I found doing that was it's a lot more complicated in practice than it might appear. Now, I'm very familiar with financing fiber projects, as over 2/3 of our awards were to fiber to the home, while the rest were involving wireless in one way or another. And fiber makes sense in many contexts, even fiber to the premise, but not always. Little story I'll tell you, before I arrived at RUS, funding was going out the door more slowly than the White House wanted. And I was confirmed, and I got stuck in the middle of that storm. I was called into then Vice President Joe Biden's office. And the Vice President gave me some really clear guidance. He wanted the money out faster. He said, quote, "Give yourselves more freaking flexibility." I'll never forget those words. It's a direct quote, not a PG version, because they became our motto at RUS. When making policy cuts, I'd often say to the staff, give ourselves more freaking flexibility. Vice President Biden's advice really proved wise. We made big changes that helped us succeed. And a big lesson, is that our US had almost more funding than we had qualified projects. We put that in context. We received nearly 30 billion in total applications, but we only awarded 3.5 billion. And that sounds pretty competitive, right? Well, it wasn't. Most of the applications were thrown out for failing to meet our financial and technical screens. They weren't feasible. Almost every one that made it through won. Those that made it through both those screens won funding. In other words, only about 1 in 8 projects penciled out as even feasible. So the lesson of the Recovery Act is that Congress can't assume funding with narrow strictures will achieve its vision. The administrator knows that the agency doesn't choose who applies for funding or which private or municipal actors want to step up. We can only consider what comes through the door. And we should only fund those that are not only willing, but able to demonstrate a plan that's both financially and technically feasible. And clearly that is difficult. More rural areas, it's even more difficult. The less densely populated it is, the more difficult it becomes. The way telecommunications networks are structured typically, only providers with infrastructure in that geographic area can expand to the hardest to reach areas. And another essential limiting factor is and should be whether Congress pays for 100% or 80% of the capital expenses. Do the ongoing revenues from subscribers cover the operating expenses? In other words, in a less densely populated area, the ones that Congress most seeks to reach, the more difficult it is to succeed in this kind of sustainability. Real future proofing requires funding only companies that will remain in business and provide good service into the future. If operating costs aren't covered by the revenue stream, the networks will fall into disrepair, that they could even become inoperable. Now, the Senate Commerce Committee hearing turned out to be really timely. I was very honored to be called in, and I was lucky about the timing because it was the last hearing held days before the bipartisan agreement on the broader infrastructure deal was reached in the Senate. And they hadn't filled in the details. It was the right time, and the Senate was the right place, because immediately after the hearing, Senate staff picked up pens to turn the framework into legislative text. And it should serve as a reminder to all of us when we talk about bipartisanship, how it can restore sensibility in the telecommunications field, which is long known for bipartisanship. This bipartisan group reportedly is considering restating that technology neutrality remains the cornerstone of US telecommunications policy. And I'm really hopeful they will. And to make this promise real, even more importantly, I'm encouraged by reports that they agreed to asymmetrical speeds. They agreed that symmetrical speeds are not required to compete for funding. They appear to be moving toward a position that 100 megabits down and 20 megabits up should be the floor. And wireless can reach that. So I'm very encouraged. If reports are accurate that the agreement will include funding for wireless, it's a threshold decision, because 65 billion is an unprecedented sum. And 40 billion of that is reportedly going straight to the states to distribute. So you compare this to what we did in 2009, the 2009 Recovery Act included a total of 7.2 billion of new spending on broadband deployment. So we'll soon be swimming in very deep and uncharted waters. Fortunately, the bipartisan Senate group is charting a course that will get broadband deployed quicker and bring mobility along with high speeds to rural America. A course that will win the race to 5G, a course that will create millions of jobs and over $1 trillion in economic development. Congress and the administration are now positioned to enact a program that would achieve its goals more easily than if it relied on a single technology. By providing implement agencies with the needed flexibility, the bipartisan agreement is more likely to garner qualified applications for unserved areas. Now, having worked in the Senate for 15 years, I've seen up close how elected officials want to deliver for their constituents. They want to get people connected as quickly as possible. Wireless networks get up and running faster. Rural Americans need broadband now. The bipartisan deal won't make consumers wait for a decade by limiting the range of eligible providers. Future-proof shouldn't mean deployed far in the future. Connectivity delayed is connectivity denied. Rural consumers shouldn't have to wait in the back of the line for many years to finally get the broadband that Congress promised. And a recent study found that it would take 10 years and an additional 70 billion to pass just 90% of US households with fiber before even reaching the last 10%, which are the greatest concerns for rural access. even connecting that 90% will require another drop to the home that would require another 15 billion. So I don't think there's enough time or money to get that done. Wireless broadband links can be installed and ready for operation in a matter of days sometimes, but in other cases, it might take, WI members report, an average of about 6 months for wireless co-location, about 18 months to build the new tower. Given that rural consumers urgently need broadband, the focus should be on utilizing all technologies to connect all communities as quickly as possible. If you rely on one and there's a bottleneck, you need to be working on the other at the same time. Like many of you, I've learned that on the road. I've been traveling again and fully vaxxed and ready to rock out there. Matter of fact, playing a little bit of music on the road. I've joined 2 conferences in the last 2 weeks and I've spoken with dozens of leading contractors who build these networks, both fiber and wireless. And they're really excited about the new funding, but I was a little surprised that, to a person, they told me that they're already as busy as they've ever seen and they're having trouble keeping up with business that's already coming in the door. Complicating that, they're confronting 3 major bottlenecks in short supply right now: heavy equipment and telecom gear that's relying on chips, materials like fiber, which is back ordered for up to a year, and skilled labor prepared to do the work in the field. Right now is bad timing on all 3, which means this could take longer than policymakers hope and more delays than rural America can afford. I've never heard more concern from contractors about a lack of available workers. If Congress adds massive additional demand and supply of workers is already short, contractors are telling me they just don't know how they'll get it done. With business booming as it is and skilled workers in short supply, Congress needs to invest in broadband workforce development, especially apprenticeships, along with investing in the infrastructure itself if they want to see it deployed anytime soon. Now, Congress is taking steps to address these issues, but it takes a long time to get the pipeline ready. For example, the Senate recently passed the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. That's a great step towards speeding the availability of chips. But, we're seeing labor shortages, as I said, in nearly every industry, not just telecom. We're no exception. 5G is a new technology that requires new skills. Accenture reports that the full impact from broadband 5G construction spending alone could be 120,000 jobs each year in the first 7 years of deployment, and that's without the stimulus. Adding in the massive fiber build out ahead, we need to ramp up the telecommunications training and apprenticeship to ensure that there's a large enough workforce to build wireless and wireline networks. We've long worked with Congress and the Department of Labor to create a skilled broadband workforce, and Congress can create additional pipelines of diverse workers ready for these jobs by taking bold action to invest in registered apprenticeships and evidence-based job training. Today, we need to register apprenticeships to expand to scale to the level needed to support the funding contemplated in this broadband bill. This is a good problem to have, creating high-wage jobs, but to ensure that the infrastructure portions of the broadband bill are successful, we need a corresponding initiative to diversify and expand the broadband workforce. An immediate expansion is needed. Resiliency of telecom networks is also a priority for Congress. That was the subject of the hearing I was testifying at. And, all telecommunications technologies are vulnerable. We've seen that in disasters recently, but each have their own. And long stretches of airly deployed fiber, whether, they're fiber or any overhead wireline service, is exposed to a lot of natural forces like hurricanes, storms, ice storms, and it can take a long period to restore. And fiber is dependent on electrical service to the home. When it goes out, there's limited battery life, and people are out of broadband and, for that matter, phone service. What do they do then? They generally rely on their wireless phones. Wireless networks, as a matter of fact, their greatest vulnerability is fiber backhaul. That might go down, but that's the technology that people wanted to use exclusively. The difference is that in wireless, we can restore one transmission site with backhaul options like microwave or satellite in emergencies much faster. And we only need to restore power or provide a generator to one transmission site that may serve thousands without power. Real future proofing means funding networks that are resilient when they're most needed in emergencies. And we need mobility. Wireless networks offer mobility that rural Americans need. They shouldn't be tethered to a short leash of Ethernet or Wi-Fi signal when they need a high-speed connection. A lot of applications like precision agriculture require broadband that blankets the farmland to be useful. So if wireless were excluded, Congress could inadvertently grow or rural mobility divide, in which many unserved residents would be limited to accessing the internet through a wired connection. By giving wireless broadband a chance to compete, including for the in-home market, the bipartisan agreement gives consumers the opportunity to benefit from mobility, including fixed wireless that supports 5G. And public safety relies on mobile networks. I had a Jeff Johnson, fire chief next to me at the hearing, and they go in harm's way to protect the public. Fiber to the premise won't help when they are racing to put out a fire or deliver healthcare and ambulances. That could become a mobile emergency room with 5G, or protect the public from crimes that are happening in progress. Public safety has always relied first and foremost on mobile networks. And now I'm thrilled that the bipartisan agreement can address that priority. And because 5G plays an especially key role in addressing climate change, and we're seeing such a disaster out west right now with these heat domes and drought, where I come from, it's just devastating to see. And the bipartisan agreement will contribute to saving the planet. Wireless networks address every policy goal in President Biden's American Jobs Plan, including its environmental goals. As a matter of fact, the World Economic Forum documented that 5G connectivity is a primary digital technology that can, quote, help reduce global carbon emissions by up to 15%, or 1/3 of the 50% required by 2020. This isn't a minor contribution. This is getting us 1/3 of the way to where we're trying to get through our technology that now hopefully is going to be included in this bill. Efficiencies in energy, smart grid, transportation, the connected cars, agriculture, water, especially water, all with precision ag, land use, building efficiency, and advanced manufacturing require and rely on wireless. We have to be part of the bill. And there's a lot of concern about affordability, we hear, for good reason. Wireless capacity continues to rival wireline service. This isn't just theory. Many rural residents are already, using their mobile connection and dropping their wireline connection. They're smartphone-only users. In rural America, nearly 1 in 5 residents are relying solely on their wireless device for broadband. 1 in 4 Americans who make less than $30,000 a year have already made the switch to smartphone only. And the same is true for those that have high school degrees or less. So, fiber to the home is the only choice. Millions of low-income and rural Americans would need to spend their hard-earned dollars for a wireline connection they already decided they don't want or can't afford. So technological flexibility is not only a better deal for a lot of consumers, but it gets the taxpayers the most megabits for the taxpayer dollar. Now, fiber is critical and it's worth the investment in a lot of cases. It's one great tool for closing the digital divide, but the last mile, often more than a mile in rural America, is the most costly to provide with fiber. And simply connecting fiber to a tower for wireless can connect premises in less time and for a lot less money. In fact, the average capital outlay per subscriber for fiber is almost 10 times what's needed for a fixed wireless connection. Congress doesn't have to choose one of these priorities at the expense of all others. We can protect the planet from climate change and give unserved consumers in rural areas the broadband service they need. What we're hearing about the bipartisan agreement represents a breakthrough in thinking by providing technological flexibility, what the vice president called for so many years ago. I'm thrilled by the reports that the wireless infrastructure industry is included because we're ready and able to expand broadband to every corner of America. Thanks for having me, Rick. It's a thrill to be back at the Media Institute.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Excellent presentation. You raised so many good points there, and we really appreciate you joining us today to share these thoughts and these good common sense ideas. So we have a lot of questions from our audience here coming in. Let me start with something that you mentioned. You said that the fiber-only approach that we've seen in the legislative proposals got its start from a 2017 FCC paper. So how did an FCC paper from 4 years ago get such traction and find its way into becoming the framework for this legislation?
Well, in a lot of ways, it was my good friend, Chairman Tom Wheeler, who really believes that's the right way to go. And he's got incredible scope and reach within Democratic circles and convinced a lot of people this is the way to go. And I think, it's well-intentioned. I think he really, believes that's the way to go. Of course, he's a former, wireless industry official. We think, he'd be considering these broader implications. So, we've had the debate. We've had the debate in front of Congress, in front of the White House. And a lot of people just think, that somehow that's the way to go. It's funny, you look at that paper and it talked about 80 billion would be the amount that would be required to pay for this. And that 80 billion figure ended up showing up in legislation. But you start looking at the paper closely, and a lot of people have read it over and over again. That 80 billion is a footnote. Literally, it's a footnote with no documentation as to where the numbers came from. All the numbers are private in the FCC database, so we don't know how the math was arrived at. A super complicated question with so much weight behind it. Basically, Congress was deferring to a footnote in a paper that wasn't explained from 2017 as far as what the cost would be. And, it's pretty remarkable how that worked, but they got very far. I mean, in the bills that passed the House, a lot of support in the House and Senate for that. And I think people are just starting to wake up to the fact that if that happens, all these other priorities get left behind: mobility, resiliency, the ability to serve public safety, the ability to address climate change, which is a top priority for so many in both Republican and Democratic circles, all require wireless connectivity. So I think that the broader debate's now joined. People are thinking about the broader implications, but it really pretty remarkable how far that paper's gotten.
For sure. We've got some good questions from our audience here. First one, do you think the current FCC will actually reverse the last administration's net neutrality position? And why is that important?
Oh, I think they will. I think it's a given. This has become kind of a religious litmus test by both, parties in the opposite directions. And so it's going to keep flip-flopping. I think it'd be ideal to have Congress enact a policy that would settle it once and for all. If we could achieve bipartisan agreement on this, we'd be able to know what the rules of the road are. I think that would enhance the ability of folks to invest, knowing what's going to happen going forward. The flip-flopping is never good for investment, but I have no doubt that the FCC will restore the rules from the previous administration.
Okay. You mentioned workforce and apprentices and training programs. Isn't WIA running an apprentice program? Can you describe what you're doing?
Yeah, we're running a program called the Telecommunications Industry Registered Apprenticeship Program. It's really taken off. We've got 58 employers have joined. What's unique about our industry is we've never really had apprenticeship, and it's worked so well in so many industries. But in this case, we kind of fall behind. So we got everybody together. You have different size companies that join. 58 companies joined together in a multi-employer effort to share resources, develop an economy of scale, and share expertise on how to do this. So the WIA is providing. We've hired experts in apprenticeship. We've hired, new CTO, Dr. Rick Thacker, who's professor at University of Maryland and teaches 5G. We've got world-class resources now for those 58 employers, and we welcome others to join us to help them get their workforce up and running. What's so great about it is it helps recruit workers to those companies that have joined. This has been proven. And, with the shortages that so many contractors are just so worried about, they're complaining to me about their concerns. They found this to be a tool that they can not only recruit people, but retain them. Again, research shows that apprenticeships help retain them, because right now what's happening is there's so few workers are getting, basically taken from one company to the other, and they're moving back and forth for another 10 cents or $1 an hour. And it's very disruptive. But if people have an apprenticeship where they know they're going to get trained, they know they have a pathway for success, they're staying longer. So they're joining up, they're staying longer. I think that's why so many employers are joining TIRAP, which is available on our WI.org website. You can get more detail on that, because we do welcome more employers to that. We're providing this service to our members and to others who want to expand the skills that they have in their current workforce, as well as attract and develop new talent.
Very good. We had another question from our audience. On top of the many issues you raised, certain advocates are trying to mandate rate regulation and price controls. Is that a threat to broadband deployment or a help?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a threat. I mean, this is a competitive market. You've seen the cost per megabit go down 98% in the last decade or so. People are getting so much more bandwidth. I would offer anybody who thinks we need price regulation to go back, and I'll give them a 2015 plan at 2015 prices. Have at it. Nobody wants that. We're offering more broadband for less money than ever before, and every day it gets better. These investments are expensive. We're talking about $270 billion to build 5G networks, and right now there's not even a clear business case as to how we get increased revenue as a result of that. So you want to incent investment in a competitive market. The last thing you want to do is try to regulate prices that would limit investment. And even the threat of that, I think, limits the ability to attract capital to an industry like this. And here's the reason you really don't want to do it, Rick. I mean, we provide what we call externalities. We invest this money, but the stock of Facebook, Google, every other company goes up way faster than the telecom industry itself, because the benefits flow to society. The benefits flow to other companies. The benefits flow to healthcare, to education, to saving the entire economy. These capital investments that we make are ones that the entire economy and healthcare system, education system rely on. So you've got to treat those capital investments, $30 billion a year we make, as precious, because the benefits don't all redound to our industry. They redound to everybody in the society. And that's why we recognize it's important to incent investment. It's why the federal government is rightly saying we need to invest in areas where the marketplace doesn't really achieve those kind of externalities, because the market itself doesn't have a business case for the most remote rural areas. It makes absolutely perfect sense. So why on the one hand would you be investing massive federal funding to expand this service because of the externalities, and on the other, disincenting investment in those same networks by doing price regulation? I mean, it kind of boggles the mind. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think serious policymakers will go down that path. I think Democrats and Republicans alike value investment in broadband networks too much to make a mistake of that magnitude.
Mm-hmm. One thing I was wondering, you mentioned the problem of Congress trying to write performance standards into law rather than just having broader guidelines and funding goals. But where do you strike the balance, or how do you approach that in terms of making sure that companies have enough flexibility and consumers have the benefit of enough flexibility, while making sure that Congress feels comfortable that their money, taxpayer money, is being spent in the ways they think is important?
Great question. I mean, traditionally, Congress doesn't set numbers in statute that are sort of technological standards of today. I mean, today's 100 is yesterday's telegraph. I mean, it's going to go faster than that. And even that is going to be, for wireless networks, 5-10 years from now, it'll be a breeze. I mean, you don't want that in statute. But look, that's the way people are going. And so if they're going to do that, certainly don't set in statute something like that number that currently would be discriminatory against a technology that can save the planet from global warming, for example. I mean, you just don't do that. But if you're going to do it, we're seeing increasing consensus around a 120 standard that wireless can meet. I mean, ideally, what you'd see is that you'd say, we want more bandwidth. We want to reward those applications that have higher bandwidth without specifying numbers, and let the agencies figure out ways to get it done. Because in some areas, it might make sense to go to 100, in some areas it might be 120, in some areas it might be a gigabit, in some areas it might be less, depending the topography, the geography, the nature of who's going to apply. What I was trying to say before was, you don't know who's going to apply, who's in that geographic area that's positioned to provide service. If you exclude certain types of applications, you may get nothing. Give yourselves some freaking flexibility to consider a lot of different approaches and innovation. And as time goes on, you want to reward increased bandwidth. No question, we're going to need more and more as time goes on. But now, wireless, and especially 5G, can deliver everything consumers are using and more. So it's a perfect substitute. Why not let that be a part of the picture? And I'm glad the bipartisan agreement is moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm. What's the latest on whether the current FCC might undo some of the infrastructure changes that were made under former Chairman Pai?
Well, I would certainly hope not. I think, the changes that were made are promoting 5G deployment. They're protecting public safety. They're allowing co-location on existing towers and existing wireless infrastructure. That's the least disruptive way to expand broadband access. And yet sometimes we get held up trying to put, something on an existing tower, or on existing, water tower, grain silo in rural areas. Let us co-locate without some of these roadblocks being thrown up. To undo that would be to set back our race to win 5G when we're competing globally, when the Chinese certainly don't have those kind of impediments. And they're making major investments, and they're clearing the way. They're investing in their workforce. They're clearing the way to siting problems. They don't have to worry about that. They're backing their businesses in ways we wouldn't ask. All we're asking is let us invest. And to say we're going to undo what have been clearly successful, we see case after case where more investment is happening because of the policies that have streamlined broadband deployment, And by the way, they did it in a responsible way. We kept it within the rights of way. We kept height limits in there, so you can't just slap a tower anywhere. I mean, they're very carefully considered. And really, we haven't seen examples of problems. Where is the real problem? I mean, there's complaining about authority, et cetera, but I think that it's in fact working. And to take something that's working and undo it, I think too highly of the FCC that they're going to go down that path. I don't think that'll happen.
Speaking of investment and going back to the previous question, if the current FCC reverses net neutrality, will that increase or decrease network investment?
Well, that's been extensively debated and the jury's out. I mean, what we've seen is, net neutrality comes and goes and investment continues. To some extent, I think the debate gets a little bit, when it comes to that very question, overblown. I mean, is it ideal to have limits that could limit funding? Is it overhang? Yeah. Is that ideal for investment? No. I mean, that's why I think Congress needs to set rules of the road that we can agree on a bipartisan basis. I mean, I think there's a lot of agreement there. If people didn't get so kind of religious about it, we could find a bipartisan agreement. I don't know if there's the incentive right now to do it, because both sides are so much in their corner on it. But from a policy perspective, that would be ideal. And that middle ground is one that I think we could all live with, and it would be probably maximize investment going forward.
Here's a question from our friend Gary Arlen. You said 5G will win the race, but now 6G is underway. Will the tech buzz about 6G deter attention and support from 5G? Do you have any timetable for 6G introduction?
I don't want to be the one to kind of guess and end up being wrong here. The Media Institute, I mean, predicting the future is tough. I mean, there's already a lot of work going on regarding those 6G networks. I mean, and we have to be thinking about that now, as opposed to waiting. So the industry's moving ahead, but 5G is going to be a bit of a slog. I mean, it's like I said, one of the biggest issues is you look at all the great use cases for 5G, and mostly they benefit other industries, not the wireless industry. How you capture the revenue and actually make a business case out of these investments is not clear. I think the investments are going to happen, and they are happening because it's important to increase capacity to keep up with consumer needs. It's important to deal with competition because it's a very, very competitive industry. Now we have 4 full-throated investment businesses going forward on a national scale, and a lot of other regional players that are very aggressively investing. That's why our contractors are so busy right now. This is highly competitive. So, it's really good for consumers, but, they get more bandwidth for less money, which is what they've been getting every year in and year out through broadband networks. But at some point, it slows down investment if there's not a clear business case for it. And, 5G is not going to be an overnight investment. I mean, we have to spend, tens of billions on C-band and on these auctions on spectrum. It's going to be, a while before we see 5G everywhere. And that's why, when you look at 5G in rural areas, if we went with a single technology, I think a lot of rural residents would say, what happened to 5G? We had all these investments we were promised. It's taken a decade to get them out here. I still don't see it. And I still can't get 5G on my device. What did Congress do with $65 billion? So I think the bipartisan group figured that out, and will hopefully get 5G to rural America much quicker as a result, along with fixed wireless.
Mm-hmm. Now, in light of the labor, materials, and equipment shortages you mentioned, what are the prospects for carrying out the goals of the RIP and Replace program?
Well, I mean, it's going well. Congress providing funding is essential to that. RIP and Replace was essential. Huawei is a danger to our national security. I think that's clear. It was clear in the Obama administration when I was there. We were hearing similar concerns. So it's kind of a price that has to be paid, and that shared cost is one that I think the taxpayers are rightly, to some extent, having to bear. It's a lot of work, and again, that's one of the reasons the contractors are so busy now. Just another of many things all firing at the same time that's keeping people busy. But it's happening, and it's plugging right along.
Okay. Well, we're coming up on our time here, but I want to close with one question that hits a little bit close to home and maybe has a fairly direct impact on your organization. In Monday's Washington Post, there was a story with a headline, "The thrill of 5G comes with an ugly downside." And they were talking about the need to build more cell towers. in places like the dunes at Dewey Beach. And Verizon reached an agreement with the city of Dewey Beach to take down 3 of the 5 cell towers they were proposing to build there. And how are you finding this in terms of dealing with municipalities and community activists and people who might have other values or other goals in terms of trying to find a balance with rolling out more broadband infrastructure?
Well, it's nothing new. There's a vocal minority that opposes wireless infrastructure when the vast majority of people want the service. And a lot of times it's the very same people that are complaining that then complain when they don't get the kind of throughput they want on their mobile device. So, this is it's a long-standing problem, but it's one that's really, frankly, getting worse. I mean, there's an organized effort to say that 5G is somehow different, which is just not true. It's the same technology. Physics hasn't changed from 4G or 1G. But there's a lot of false information out there on the internet. And in this case, it wasn't about that. It was about the aesthetics of it. And I think, I think it's beautiful what people see over their devices. They certainly enjoy looking at it here. And the price to be paid is you've got to have antennas somewhere. I mean, it's just the way it works. People at the beach are constantly taking pictures and streaming, and it's a whole new world. Instead of, some people get bored at the beach just sitting there staring at the ocean. It's nice for a while, but maybe they want to watch a little something on their phone. And if they don't have that 5G network there, they won't be able to do it. So again, it's an example of, a vocal minority that is speaking out, when the reason that the carriers are putting that equipment there is because the consumers are demanding it. They aren't making these investments for their health. They're making it for the benefit of their customers, because they're seeing that's where there's an issue. That's where there's sort of a bottleneck in terms of capacity. So we've got to find a way to work together with municipalities, to work together with local communities. And we do that. I mean, we've cited the world's greatest wireless network together, hand in hand with municipalities. We'll continue to do it. I think there needs to be sensitivity to local concerns, but at the same time, we've got to get that infrastructure out there, because that's what people are demanding, and we'll meet their needs.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. This has been a very informative presentation, and we're so glad that you were able to join us today and then to go on and field questions on such a range of issues here. So we thank you very much for being a part of our Communications Forum Luncheon today. And
well, thank you, Rick. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Great to be with you again.
Oh, thank you so much. And I want to thank our sponsors once again. Glad to have you with us. And special thanks to Dave Arland of Arland Communications, John Taylor of LG Electronics, and our chairman of the board, Mr. Dick Wiley. So enjoy the rest of your summer, and we'll see you in September with Kathleen Ham of T-Mobile. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you to our guest speaker today. Thank you to the Navy Band, and a big thank you again to our sponsors. We'll see you next month.